Welcome back to another installment of our overview of the Old Testament. And this week, we're going to be pretty much finishing up pre-Israel history. In just a matter of about a month and a half, we have covered 2,000 years of Old Testament history, beginning with the creation, moving to the corruption, which began in Genesis chapter 3, the corruption of all of nature and all of man. And we're going to transition between corruption and countries this week so that we can start the majority of the Old Testament, which concerns Israel. Now, just before we completely leave Noah and the ark, let me ask you a question. Why did God judge the world with a flood? Everybody was evil. Absolutely right. And Reb just quoted a part of the verse to which I will reference. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And when did that state begin? As soon as Adam and Eve picked of the fruit and ate of it in rebellion to God in Genesis chapter 3, our entire nature changed, and we had this bent, this inclination, if you will, toward sin, toward resisting what God has revealed. Why did God judge the world? Because of wickedness. And folks, if you want to be delivered from the judgment of God, this has got to be your starting place. And this is why many never, ever get saved. Because they refuse to acknowledge that they've done anything worthy of such a drastic reaction from God. They get the idea that God woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Maybe his wife substituted decaf coffee for caffeine or something, or he just was in a bad mood and he's overreacting. No. This point of view, if that's the way you think, is a real lack of an awareness of the depth of our sinfulness. It is also a lack of an appreciation of the awesomeness of his holiness. And when people are really confronted by an actual vision of the God who created them, they say, like Isaiah, "Oh, woe is me, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell among a people of unclean lips." We recognize immediately that we are indeed worthy of all of the wrath that God could or would pour out on his rebellious creation. And Noah believed God. Noah didn't argue with God and say, "Aren't you just reacting a little overboard here?" Nope. Noah believed God, and God graced him with the means to be saved. And Noah and the ark, the flood story, is just a preview of what is coming at the end of time, when Jesus Christ returns. And so I ask a related question. Why is Jesus Christ coming back to judge the world? Same reason. And Jude repetitiously puts it this way: the Lord came with his holy myriads, that's holy 10,000s, plural, to execute judgment upon some. Is that what it says? No. Upon all, and to convict all of the ungodly of all of their deeds of ungodliness, which they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things which ungodly sinners have spoken against him. This is why God judges. He's a righteous judge. He's just not going to sweep stuff under the rug. And so I ask, is God unjust to judge the world? No, he is not. Is God obliged to rescue us? No, he is not. What does that tell you about God, people? It tells you that our God is kind. He's not just standing there with a hammer like Thor waiting to pound on somebody who gets out of line. God is patient toward us, wanting all of us to repent and to come to a knowledge of the truth. God is not obliged to rescue us. Now, did our corrupt nature change after the flood? No, it did not. Rather than requote the verse, this is what God said after the flood in Genesis chapter 8. The Lord said, imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. He didn't say it was part evil, part good, some more good, some more evil. No, all of it. One word, evil from his youth. Our corrupt nature did not change after the flood, and so the corruption continues. After the flood, what do we run into in Genesis chapter 9? We run into this story. Noah was the first tiller of the soil. What's that mean? He was a farmer. Now, was he the first? No, but he is the first after the flood. So Noah was the first farmer. He planted a vineyard, and he drank of the wine, and he became drunk, and he lay uncovered in his tent. And Ham, the father of Canaan, saw the nakedness of his father, and he told his two brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth, those are his two brothers, took a garment, laid it on both of their shoulders, and they walked backwards so that they could cover up the nakedness of their father. Their faces turned away, and they did not see their father's nakedness. And when Noah awoke from his wine, he knew what his youngest son had done to him. Now, let me explain this story in as gentle terms as I possibly can. Noah gets drunk and he's in his own tent. Ham's got no business going into his daddy's tent. But he goes in there with intention. And he sees his opportunity because his daddy has gotten drunk and he's passed out and he's naked. Now, let me tell you what custom was in those days, and we see it in Ugaritic texts, Sumerian texts, Egyptian texts, and Babylonian texts, that anybody, referring to a male, who mounts another male and penetrates him is exercising authority and dominion over him. In fact, in one of the stories, one of the gods, they had all these mythological gods that they made up, had a fight with another god, and that's exactly what he did to show his dominance and authority over the lesser god. And what Ham has done here is the same thing that Reuben tried to do with his father Jacob. I'll explain that in just a second. Ham wants to be in charge of the family. He now wants dominion, and this is why he did this, and this is why, when he comes out of the tent, he's anxious to tell his two brothers. Why? Because it's like saying, guys, I'm the boss now. I'm in charge. Let me tell you what I just did. Okay? So that's what's going on. And so the corruption continues. Now, because the custom was different a few hundred years later, Reuben took a different approach when he tried to take over Jacob or Israel's family. In those days, if you slept with your father's women or wives or concubines, then you were showing dominance over him. And Reuben tried that, and it cost Reuben his firstborn rights. And Jacob cursed him because of it. All right, so the corruption continues. Now, after the flood, God gave Noah some instructions. And we see how people respond to God's instructions, don't we? All right. Now, maybe first set of instructions are concerning dominion. Dominion. See if these words sound familiar. Over in Genesis chapter 9, it says, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Have we heard those words before? We did. Those are the same instructions that God gave Adam. He's exercising dominion. He wants him to be fruitful, grow stuff, get flocks and herds, multiply, have lots of children and grandchildren, and do what? Fill up the earth. That means all of the earth that can be inhabited, make sure that it's got people, okay? You don't stay in one place, spread out and fill up the entire earth so that the entire world may be filled with the glory of God. Now, what comes after this in Genesis chapter 1 when God says, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth? The next thing he does is he says, and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the air and over every living thing that moves upon the face of the earth. Take charge of the animals. You are the boss. They are lesser creatures. You are the crown of my creation, and you, not the angels, you, Adam, not the animals, are created in the image of God. So subdue it. Take charge. Make it work for you. I imagine when Adam needed some help plowing, because he was there to till the garden, wasn't he? He could call the ox over, and the ox would say, sure. Well, I mean, he probably didn't talk, but he was anxious to help Adam. If Adam needed to get from one side of the garden to the other, he could call a horse over and jump on its back, and the horse would be glad to take him. Now, God is telling Noah that dominion after the flood is going to be a little different. He says, the fear of you and the dread of you will be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the air and everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea. Now, when you go up to a bunch of horses out in the wild, what do? They run away. Even the most ferocious of animals, they have this instinctive fear of human beings. I can remember watching a documentary on cheetahs in the wild. And this cheetah was about 100 yards away, just lying there on the ground. And she was watching this fella who was taking film footage of her. And they closed in on her, and you know what she's doing? She's trembling. That cheetah could have attacked that photographer and killed him in an instant. But there is this fear and dread. When Sharon and I were in Alaska a couple of years ago, and they'd let us off the bus up near Denali or Mount McKinley, they would say, if you guys want to walk down the trails and have a look around, be my guest, but make sure that you talk loudly and make a lot of noise. Because even the moose that can destroy you and the grizzly bear that can destroy you, if they hear you coming and you don't surprise them, chances are they are going to move on down the road because they don't want to be around us. So the fear and the dread of you shall be on every beast of the field. Now, folks, there are 4 phases of relationship with animal kind that we're going to notice in the Bible. And one of the reasons that I'm presenting this overview of the Old Testament is so you can see how things are going to be in the end as told to us and pictured to us in the Old Testament. Believe it or not, that's where all of our, or most of our information comes from, is the Old Testament. What's it going to be like in the end times? We'll find it in the Old Testament. In the beginning, God created man and the animals on the same day, and they all got along, and nobody was afraid of anybody. That changed. And here after the flood, now the animals are avoiding man. There's a time coming when the church is going to be taken out of the world, and the 7 final years of history before Jesus Christ returns to judge the earth and to set up his kingdom is going to be a little bit different relationship between the animals and mankind. Let me show you what it says over here in Revelation chapter 6. The scene is in heaven, and the Lamb, that's Jesus Christ, has just opened the 4th seal. And I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Go!" And behold, a pale horse and its rider, whose name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given power over 1/4 of the earth. Now, he's not talking about 1/4 of the earth geographically. He's talking about the population. 1/4 of the earth's population are going to be killed in 4 different ways. Now, if you figure that we have almost 8 billion people on the earth right now, and I don't know when this is going to happen, this is still in the future. We have 7.8 billion people. 1/4 is roughly 2 billion people. If it happened today, roughly 2 billion people would die by the sword. What's that? It's either murder or war or both. With famine, droughts, not being able to grow enough crops. Pestilence. What's pestilence? COVID-19. That's a pestilence, folks. It's a pandemic. It's disease. And what's the 4th thing? By wild beasts of the earth. All of a sudden, the animals out in the wild are no longer afraid of you. And they're going to come looking for you. And between war and pestilence and famine and animal attacks, 2 billion people will die in no time flat. But is it going to stay that way? No, because when Jesus Christ returns in what we call the millennial kingdom, the Jews always refer to it as the restoration. Why? Because it's going to restore the kingdom to Israel, but it's also going to restore things to the way that God made them back in Genesis chapter 1 and 2. This is the relationship that animals will have, not only with us, but with one another. The wolf will dwell with the lamb. And guess what? The lamb will not be afraid. And the leopard will lie down with the kid, not your kid. We're talking about a goat. And the calf and the lion and the fatling together, and a little child shall lead them. You know, a 2 or 3-year-old walking up to a 1,200-pound muskox saying, "Come on, come with me." And sure enough, the little child shall lead them. The cow and the bear shall feed together. Their young shall lie down together, and the lion shall eat straw like an ox, and he'll like it. The sucking child, the nursing child will play over the hole of an asp. That's an Egyptian cobra. And the weaned child shall put his hand on the adder's den. They shall not hurt or destroy in all my holy mountain. So, God also gives Noah some instructions, not only concerning dominion, but concerning diet. Those are the verses that we've covered, but it continues in red. Speaking of the animals, God says, "Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you." Okay? That means if my wife wants to suck down 3 dozen oysters before she has lunch down there in Panama City, she can do that. If Ozzy Osbourne or the residents of Wuhan, China want to eat bats, they can do that if they want to. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you. And I've got some friends who are in some of these splinter messianic groups who say, no, we need to be more like the Jews and follow the dietary laws of the law of Moses. And Paul, who is a Pharisee, who had never had anything in his mouth unclean all of his life, corrects that notion right away. Because why? Because Jesus has fulfilled the law of Moses. We are not under the law of Moses. And so over in 1 Timothy chapter 4, he tells you where that kind of teaching comes from. He says, now the Spirit, this is 1 Timothy chapter 4, expressly says that in the latter times some will depart from the faith by giving heed or listening to deceitful spirits and the doctrines of demons. So where does this stuff come from? It's not from God. Through the pretensions of liars whose consciences are seared. What do? Who forbid marriage. We don't have any denominations in the United States or in the world that forbid people to get married, or even just their ministers, do we? No. And enjoin abstinence from foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and who know the truth. And what is the truth? That after the flood, God said, if it moves, eat it. That means John the Baptist can eat grasshoppers and honey. And he did. For everything created by God is good, and nothing is to be rejected if it is received with thanksgiving, for then it is consecrated by the word of God and prayer. Now, what does Jesus say? Well, in speaking to his disciples, he said, are you also without understanding? Do you not see that whatever goes into a man from the outside, that means what he eats, cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and it so passes on. And thus he declared all foods clean. But you're saying, then why did he tell Israel not to eat everything? It's not because those foods were bad for Israel. You can't make a case that it was healthier for Israel to eat that way. All the nations of the world ate everything that moved. What is one of the things that brings us together in social relation and happiness and camaraderie? Eating together. And one of the things that God was determined to do with his nation Israel is to keep them from the practices of the pagan Gentiles and all of their harlotry of worship in a sexual way. And one of the best ways to do that is that he gave them instructions on how they were going to wear their hair and what they could put in their mouth. And they couldn't eat the same things that the Gentiles ate. And so they didn't get together for dinner very often. And he kept Israel distinct from the rest of the nations. That wasn't intended to last forever, and that's not what God told Noah after he got off the ark. And Jesus confirms that all things are okay to eat, unless you're an Israelite living under the law of Moses. And there's no reason for that today, is there? No. Christ has fulfilled the law. All right. He also gave Noah some instructions concerning death. He said, for your lifeblood I surely will require a reckoning. Of every beast I will require it, and of a man. Of every man's brother I will require the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. Let me sum it up for you. If a man loses his life in an unlawful way because of an animal attack or because of a human attack, whoever did the dirty deed must die. And does God say, I'm going to do it? No. He says, by man shall his blood be shed. And why is murder wrong? Why is the unlawful taking of a man's life wrong? Because man was made in God's image, and murder mars the image of man. And so God gave some instructions concerning dominion, diet, and death. But let's go back to the instructions concerning dominion so that I can move ahead with our narrative this morning in Genesis chapter 11. You recall the basics. God said, be fruitful, multiply and what? Fill up the earth. Have lots of kids and grandkids and move out and occupy all of the occupiable or habitable land on the face of the earth. And what did they do? What do you think they did? They're evil man. It's just part of our nature to resist what God has shown us he wants us to do. And so over in Genesis chapter 11, Moses tells us that the whole earth had one language. Everybody spoke the same thing, and they had all the same words. As men migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar and settled there. Where is Shinar? Is that a place where the sun always shines? No. Let me show you what that is. Okay. Just so you can get your bearings, you see over on the western side of the screen that's left for some of you, that at the eastern edge of the Mediterranean Sea, we've got where Israel is. You see Jerusalem just right there next to that little body of water called the Dead Sea. Up in the northeast corner, you got the Caspian Sea. And if you'll come west just a little bit, you'll see two smaller bodies of water. The one on the left that looks like it's pointing like this, it is pointing. That's Lake Van. And if you follow where it's pointing to, it's actually pointing to Mount Ararat, which is where the ark settled. So Noah and his family have got to come down from the mountains into the green area that is called Mesopotamia, which means between the two rivers. What two rivers? The Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. It's part of the Fertile Crescent. These rivers used to overflow because of the excess water coming down from melting snow in the mountains. And the Nile in Egypt overflowed every year. And the Jordan in Israel overflowed every year. And the Tigris and the Euphrates overflowed every year. And because of that, the land was very fertile, and you didn't have much problems growing things. But that entire area of Mesopotamia was known in the Hebrew language as the land of Shinar. So I just want you to know where you are right now. Now, back to dominion. And what did they do? They said to one another, come on, let's make bricks and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, come on, let's build ourselves a city. Does anybody know what a city is? A city is a great congregation of a lot of people in a small area. Already an alarm ought to be going off in your heads concerning what God said, fill the earth. And what are they doing? Are they spreading out? No, they're congregating. Do you know that in the United States, 62% of our population, you would expect, would live on 62% of the land area, right? No, 62% of our 350 million people live on 3.5% of our land mass. Can you believe that? Everybody is congregating in places that we call cities. They're all jam-packed in there. And what do these guys do? They say, let's build a city, because all kinds of good things happen in the city, don't they? Yeah, like crime. Crime is lower in the city, right? This is a chart comparing both violent crime and property crime in the rural areas and in the city areas. And this is a graph that's kind of misleading, because it's a graph that says these are the violent crimes or property crimes per capita or per 100,000 residents. If you did it by the actual number of crimes, the number in the cities would be even higher on the graph than what you see right here. So all kinds of good things happen in the cities. In farm communities, many of you grew up in a farm community. And how many farm communities have a brothel? You know, a place where you can go and pay for sex. I'm sure there's some, but there aren't too many. How about topless restaurants or strip clubs? Not too many out in the rural areas, but thanks to James Spann, all of Alabama knows that we've got one in northwestern Jefferson County now. Not that he went there. He just kind of mentioned it on one of his weather reports. How many farm communities have a homeless problem? How many farm communities have traffic jams? I can remember being in a traffic jam, my very first traffic jam on the Fish and Game Club Road in Columbia County, New York. My future wife and I were coming up that road just a few days before we were married, and Herb Monti pulled out into the road with his tractor and a wagon load of hay, and he pulled out because he wanted to get ahead of us and get across the road to his house, and he knocked the whole wagon load of hay over in the middle of the road. So Jan and I got out of the car, and we spent the next 20 minutes helping him get the hay out of the road so that the road would be clear. When we got back to our car, there were actually 5 cars behind us. 5 cars, the biggest traffic jam I'd ever seen. How many farm communities have gang wars? Chicago had a really good year last year. 500 homicides, down from 800. 1 year. How many farm communities have gang wars? You find a lot of pollution out there in the farm communities? What effect does pestilence have on a city? You can just ask New York City residents. It spreads like wildfire because everybody's jam-packed into a tiny little space. You think maybe God had a good idea when he said, "Be fruitful, multiply, and fill up the earth"? I think so, but I digress. More instructions concerning dominion. What else did they do? Well, we've covered that. They said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." And what else? A tower. A tower with its tops in the heavens. Now, the purposes of these towers that have been discovered in Babylon and Mesopotamia were religious purposes. They're known today as ziggurats. And they were built up, and probably the highest structure in various cities. And they were for religious purposes because they imagined that their God met their priest at the top of one of these towers, and that's how they communicated and did rituals for their God. Was this the God of creation? Was this the God of the Bible? No. And when God refers to Babel or Babylon in Isaiah or in Revelation, he calls Babylon the mother of harlotry, because that is where first organized religion against God, religion that was opposed to God, began. It is Babylon. And in Revelation, when God says, "I'm going to destroy Babylon," it means I am destroying the false religious systems of the world. And so that's what the purpose of this tower was. And Reb just happened to take a picture of it when he was a little boy, and he brought it in for me, and there it is up on the screen. Now, some of them had a square base like a pyramid, and some of them were round. But you can see they're trying to build it up. And why do they want the top of this thing to reach up into the heavens? Why do they want it so high? Well, just think. What was the previous story? God judged the world with a flood. And they're probably chuckling to themselves saying, "Let him try it now. We're going to be up so high, the waters won't reach us." People are always trying to get the best of God. So they've got a tower with its top in heaven, and let us make a name for ourselves instead of let's exalt the name of our God, and lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of the earth. They have a distinct, expressed motive for doing this. we are not going to spread out. We are not going to be fruitful and multiply and fill up the earth. We are going to stay together because what we have found as mankind, because of this wonderful brain that God has given us, that if we keep bouncing ideas off of one another and communicate and collaborate and cooperate, we can get a lot done, and we don't need God. And if we don't need God, then we don't need to obey God. And this is why they want to stick together, rather than be scattered abroad upon the face of the whole earth. You with me? Now let's review some of the conditions that we've got here. We've got one government. They're all gathered together in one place. They probably have one religion. They are united in their opposition to God. That's pretty clear. They even said it themselves. They probably have one leader. Most theologians assume that this is Nimrod, who built many of the cities there in the Mesopotamian area. And they all speak the same language, so they have no problems communicating with one another, cooperating and collaborating and getting things done. You with me now? Okay, that's the situation. And remember, this is going to be a picture of things at the end of time before Jesus Christ comes back to set up his kingdom and to judge the world. So what is God's assessment of what's going on in Mesopotamia? He said, behold, they are one people and they all have one language, and this is just the beginning of what they will do, and nothing that they now propose to do will be impossible for them. Now, if God had not interrupted this, let me see if I can explain. There's obviously limitations. These people cannot evolve into and become God. There's only certain things that God created man to be able to do. But God knows that when they put their brains together and communicate and cooperate and collaborate, they can do things like invent airplanes that fly through the air. And send rockets to the moon. And rocket ships out past Pluto. There's a lot of stuff that we can do. Have you ever never wondered why all of those centuries there were hardly any inventions at all, and all of a sudden in the past 150, 200 years, suddenly we have all of these amazing technological, scientific, and medical advances? Well, this passage is going to explain that. In this modern age, what kind of things has man been hoping to accomplish in the race? Well, he wants to improve us. Let's just discuss these things from a medical point of view. What have we been able to, in the past 150 years or so, accomplish, medically speaking? Well, let's start with vaccines. Vaccines. Why do we need vaccines? Because disease ruins our lives, and it shortens our lives. We want to improve the quality of our lives. We want to extend the length of our lives. So we've got these vaccines. And you know, people will tell you the vaccines have done a lot of good, and you know, I suppose they have. But I'm going to ask you a question, and the answer is going to surprise you. How many diseases have vaccines eradicated? How many? Anybody want to venture a guess? How many diseases have been eradicated because of vaccines? One. Only smallpox has been eradicated. Well, what about polio? Folks, 125 cases of polio just last year. Now, vaccines have done a great deal to curb the spread of a lot of serious diseases, but they have eradicated only one. And it has indeed improved our lives, but is that man's really real motivation. What else have they done? Implants. Implants. I can get implants in my eyes to help me to see. Implants in my ears. If I were born deaf, there's an implant that could actually bring hearing to me. You can get an implant called a pacemaker that will regulate your heartbeat. You, if you're a diabetic, can get something installed that will detect when you're low on insulin and will automatically give you the exact amount of insulin that your body needs. Implants have improved our lives and have extended the length of our lives. What about transplants? Transplants. We can transplant heart, lungs, a lot of things. There's even this fellow who has volunteered to be the first head transplant. My wife has asked me to volunteer for that. But transplants come from living or dead human beings as donors, don't they? And I'm not going to get into the stuff that they actually transplant, because the body parts that they transplant, if I gave you a list, you wouldn't think about anything else in this sermon and you wouldn't hear the rest of it. So let's just say that living and dead human beings are donating various body parts. There's also regenerative medicine where they can go in and take some of your tissue, or so they're hoping, and possibly grow an organ in the laboratory and transplant it back into your bodies. These are some of the things that you're working on. How about transplanting animal parts into human beings? Oh, they've done that with very little success, but there is one procedure that has been very prevalent, and a lot of people who have had valve replacement surgery have had what? Pigs' parts transplanted into them. So transplants are what? They're improving our lives and perhaps lengthening. All right? Now, there's also gene therapy. Gene therapy. I could use some gene therapy because my genes are getting a little tight. Actually, that's not what I'm talking about. What do we mean by gene therapy? Gene therapy is the replacement of bad genes with good genes, or the repair of bad genes. You know, that genetic makeup that you have. Experiments, well, actually, some of these are not even experiments. Experiments in gene manipulation in mice have actually created a group of mice, this ought to make some of you sit up and take notice, who are perpetually thin. They do not gain weight, no matter how much junk food they eat. Wouldn't that be great? I mean, about all of us would probably sign up for that, except for maybe Fred. Okay? Gene manipulation in mice has eliminated, for mice anyway, Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. That's all done through gene therapy, and they're hoping to do that for human beings. You as a young couple, through gene manipulation, may go to your doctor and say, we would like to have children, but we would like to have a boy who's 6'1", blonde hair, blue eyes, medium build, but very athletic, and super, super smart. You could have a designer baby. Let me tell you what else they've done, and this is going to blow your mind. So when I first heard about this the other day, I thought, this is science fiction. This isn't really happening. So I researched, and sure enough, it is. They have taken a single spider gene from its DNA, a spider gene, and introduced it into goat DNA. Why? Just why? Well, let me tell you what they've come up with. The goat's milk is of such a nature that they can make strands of fiber from the goat's milk that is 5 times stronger than steel. Because the the toughest substance known to mankind, both in its resistance and its flexibility, is spiderweb. And combining that with a goat, they have actually produced milk from which they can make fibers, and they're hoping to make bulletproof vests that are very thin and don't weigh much at all. All right? That's not science fiction. It's actually happening. Here's the one you're going to like. A lamb was genetically modified with jellyfish DNA. Jellyfish DNA to produce what? Of all things, transparent skin. This actually happened. Transparent skin. Can you imagine how advantageous that would be? You go to the doctor and say, "Doc, I got a pain right here." He goes, "All right, take off your shirt and let's have a look." "Oh yeah, I can see what's happening." Man, that would save a lot on MRIs and X-rays and things like that. But what they're looking forward to doing is being able to splice some starfish DNA into the human gene pool. Why starfish? Well, when you cut off a starfish's arm, what does he do? Well, he grows another one. You cut off my arm, do I grow another one? No. But if you introduce some starfish DNA, that might improve things and extend my life through gene therapy. Is your wife dying of cancer? Have somebody get a little bit of her and get her cloned. You won't miss her so much. Folks, you know man's heart, don't you? Is he really all about just improving things medically for us? Or does he have another motive that might be, we don't need God? Could it be immortality? The Bible says that the wages of sin is death. And it's like an in the face of God, yeah, we'll show you. We'll eliminate death. These are called transhuman ideas, and transhumanism is a very real thing, and it's been around for a while. Dr. Frankenstein, Mary Shelley, wrote a book about putting parts together. We don't need God to make a human being. We can do it ourselves. From one of their own publications, transhumanism is the intellectual and cultural movement that affirms the possibility and desirability of fundamentally improving the human condition through applied reason, especially by developing and making widely available technologies to eliminate aging and to greatly enhance human intellectual, physical, and psychological abilities. And these guys are all evolutionists. They all believe that we have evolved over millions of years. However, now that we are collaborating on this, we can accelerate the evolution process. Anybody who has ever watched Star Trek has looked forward to the evolution of our species as human beings, having abilities like the X-Men, being able to turn invisible, or superpowers, or super fast speed like the Flash. These are all the imaginations of people who are transhumanist in philosophy. A common feature of transhumanism and philosophical posthumanism, in other words, what happens after we're human, what we are now, what comes after us, is the future vision of a new intelligent species into which humanity will evolve and eventually will supplement or supersede it. Why do we need God? We don't. We're going to become all that we ever hoped or ever need to be. Very few technological, scientific, or medical advances have come in isolation. Men and women, as brilliant as some of them are, have built their theories and their discoveries and their inventions on the shoulders of other people's discoveries and inventions. It follows then that the greater the communication, the collection, the cooperation, and the collaboration of these brilliant people, the more they can accomplish. This, my friends, is why airplanes were not invented shortly after the Tower of Babel, because God wouldn't let them come near each other. In the past, what has tended to get in the way? Two things: language and location. Let's say 200 or 300 years ago, you're working on a scientific project in Germany, and there's a fellow over in China who's been researching the same thing. One, you probably don't even know about him because he's so far away, and you don't speak his language. So what are the chances of the two of you getting together to swap notes and to share ideas and to collaborate on this project? Not much at all. So what has God permitted to happen in the past 150 or 200 years, where we see this unbelievable, off the charts technological advances in every field? Well, he's removed the language and location barriers. We now can travel back and forth to various countries, usually in less than a day. And now with the internet, you don't even need to travel to collaborate with a whole group of other people. You can sit in front of your computer screen and they can see you and you can see them, and you can all share ideas for the entire day live in real time. And if you go to most developed nations, what is the language that they speak in addition to their own language? English. Everybody knows English. And when I was overseas, everybody wanted to practice his English on me. They love doing it. The language barrier is broken down, and the location barrier is not an issue anymore. So, what is God's solution to this back at Babel? He said, let's go down and confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they left off building the city. But there is a time when God, that is coming and is already here, where God wants this to happen. And we're experiencing that right now. This is how they spread out over all the earth. And it's going to come, and the conditions are going to be kind of similar to what happened at the Tower of Babel. There will be one government. They will have one religion. They will be united in their opposition to God. They will have one leader. The Bible calls him the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, or the beast. And they all know and have a common language. Look at this in Revelation chapter 13. And I saw a beast rising up out of the sea. This is the one who will rule the world. All authority will be given to this person. And to it the dragon, who's that? That's Satan, and gave his power and his throne and great authority, and the entire earth followed the beast with wonder. We got one leader. And they worshipped the beast. What's that? That's one religion. Saying, who's like the beast and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words. Against whom? Against God. They're all united in their opposition to God. And it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. What's that? That's 3.5 years. So for 3.5 years, this person has absolute authority over all the nations of the earth, and this person is being worshipped. We got one world government, and we got one world religion. And if I had time, I'd go into the rest of the chapter and show that there would be one world economy, and that you couldn't even buy or sell anything unless you had the mark of this beast, or the number of his name. And authority was given it over every tribe and people and tongue and nation. Just to be clear, this is what I mean by the whole world. Every tribe, people, tongue, and nation, and all who dwell on the earth will worship the beast, everyone whose name has not been written before the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slain. Folks, why am I going over the Old Testament? Because what we're seeing in the Old Testament will have its ultimate fulfillment when Jesus Christ returns to judge the world. And we're given a preview in Babel of some of the conditions that will be present before Jesus Christ comes to judge the world. Meanwhile, God is being patient. And if you have any sense at all, and if God gives you the grace, surrender now to him. Don't continue to resist and to say, we don't need God for this. We can do this ourselves if you give us just enough time and let us put our heads together.